Wyoming Territory, July 1882. The sun was high when he first saw her tied to a split-rail fence, arms bound cruelly behind her back, her face streaked with dust and blood. Xavier O'Malley pulled his horse to a hard stop, heart seizing in his chest as he stared. She was alive, barely. She lifted her head at the sound of his hoofbeats. Her eyes met his wild with fear, but locked onto him like he was the first real thing she had seen in days. "Help me," she rasped. He was off his horse in an instant, boots crunching over dry earth as he ran to her. The wind tugged at her dark hair, tangled and matted. Her wrists were raw where the ropes cut into skin. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Whoever had left her here hadn't cared whether she lived or died. Xavier didn't ask questions. He pulled his knife from his belt, sliced through the ropes, and caught her as she fell forward into him. "I've got you," he said, voice low. She didn't answer. She just clung to his shirt. He lifted her, cradled her like she weighed nothing, and carried her to his horse. She stayed quiet, head tucked into his chest, breathing shallow. Her whole body trembled against him. "Name's Xavier," he said gently as he set her in the saddle, keeping an arm around her waist to steady her. "You got a name, Zadie," she whispered. "Zadie Kessler." "Well, Zadie," he said, swinging up behind her, "you are safe now." He turned the horse and rode hard, leaving the fence and the wide, empty plain behind them. They reached his cabin by dusk. It sat tucked against a ridge of cottonwoods, miles from the nearest town. The small ranch he kept had once belonged to his uncle. Now it was just him, a horse named Whiskey, and a quiet life he had gotten used to. Zadie didn't speak much that first night. He got her water, then food, bread and beans, and she ate like she had not seen a meal in days. He let her take the only bed, and he slept in the rocking chair near the hearth, a rifle across his knees. She woke twice screaming. The third time she whispered, "I thought they were coming back." "They are not," he said. "Not here." She nodded, eyes wide in the firelight, and pulled the blanket tighter around her. He gave her space. But he did not leave her alone. By the third day, she was walking steadier. She stood on the porch with him, watching the sun come up over the hills. "They took my wagon," she said, voice quiet. Xavier looked over at her. "Was it just you traveling?" "No," she said. "My younger brother and—" Her voice hitched. "My 2 kids." He turned to face her fully. "You have children," she nodded, blinking fast. "Perry is 9, Pearl is 6. We were headed to my uncle's land near Fort Laramie. We were halfway through the pass when they came. Bandits," she nodded. 4 men said they wanted the horses, then they tied me up and left me like that." He stepped closer. "And your children?" "I do not know," she whispered. "They took them. I think they meant to sell them, or worse." Xavier's jaw locked. "We will find them." Her eyes snapped to him. "You do not even know me." He held her gaze. "I know enough." They rode out at dawn the next morning. Zadie refused to stay behind. She wore his spare coat, cinched tight, and carried a small revolver he had taught her to use the day before. He did not argue. There was a fire in her now, a mother's fire. He would not try to tame that. They rode north toward the pass. Xavier knew the terrain. He had worked cattle through these hills for years, had chased down rustlers and wolves alike. He knew how to track. They found the wagon on the second day, half burned in a gulch. Zadie's hands shook as she sifted through the wreckage. Then Xavier found the first boot print. Big, deep. Pointing west. "You see this?" he asked, kneeling beside it. She nodded. "Whoever took them, they are not riding fast. They are not afraid." "They should be," Zadie said. They tracked the men for 2 days through dry hills and red rock valleys. On the third night, they saw the campfire. Zadie froze. "That is them," she breathed. "You stay here," Xavier said. "No," he looked at her. "I am going in," she said. "They are my children." He nodded once. They approached just before dawn, using the low rocks for cover. The 4 men were asleep around the fire. The wagon was nearby, and in the back, huddled under a blanket, were 2 small shapes. Zadie's breath caught. She started moving faster. Xavier grabbed her arm. "We do this quiet." He went in first, knife in hand. The first man never woke. The second opened his eyes just in time to see Xavier's fist. Zadie was already at the wagon, whispering to her children. "Mama, Perry said, dazed. Yes, baby, it is me. You are safe. You are safe now. Pearl burst into tears. By the time the third man stirred, Xavier had his gun on him. The fourth ran, but not far. A single shot rang out, echoing through the canyon. It was over in minutes. Zadie pulled her children close. Xavier stood behind her, watching every shadow, every tree. Are you hurt? He asked her. No, she said. They are okay. They are okay. She turned and looked up at him, eyes full. Thank you. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face. You do not have to thank me. She leaned into him, sudden and certain, and he wrapped his arms around all three of them. They rode out together, her children between them, the morning sun rising behind. The cottonwoods swayed gently in the breeze as Zadie poured water into a tin basin and knelt to wash her daughter's face. Pearl giggled at the coolness, leaning into her mother's palm. Perry sat nearby, whittling a crooked stick with the short-bladed knife Xavier had given him. The boy's lips were pursed in concentration, his small fingers careful around the blade. Xavier stood a few feet off, checking the saddle straps one by one. They'd been back at the cabin 4 days. Long enough for the children to sleep through a night without crying out. Long enough for Zadie to stop flinching when birds startled from the trees. Not long enough for any of it to feel fully behind them. She dried Pearl's cheeks with a square of cloth and looked over at him. Do you always lie this quiet? She asked. He glanced up from the saddle. Most days. Zadie stood brushing dust from her skirts. I don't think I ever knew quiet like this. Even back in Kansas, there was always someone's voice carrying from the next farmhouse. Always a dog barking. You miss it? I did. Before. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. Now I think I'm afraid what I'd hear if someone started hollerin' again. He walked back toward the porch, slow steps over dry earth. You got time to want things again, Zadie. There's no rush. She didn't answer right away. Pearl had run to Perry, plopped beside him in the grass. Zadie watched them a moment before turning her face toward Xavier. What did you want before all this? He leaned against a porch post, arms crossed. Before the war, I wanted to be a teacher, she blinked. Truly, he nodded. My ma taught letters to half the valley when I was growing up, thought I'd follow her path. What stopped you? He looked past her toward the trees. The war ended and I didn't feel like teaching anymore. Too much in my head, too much I didn't want to speak aloud. Zadie stepped up onto the porch beside him. And now, what do you want now? He met her eyes. Now I want to keep you and your children safe, feed you steady. Let you sit down without worry. The words settled between them like a promise, quiet and certain. She lowered her eyes, cheeks flushed. I don't know how to repay that. You don't owe me a thing, he said. But I'm not sending you off unless you want to go. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. That evening, Perry sat on the steps, his stick now shaped like a small wolf, ears pointed and tail curled. Pearl had fallen asleep in her mother's lap, thumb tucked into her mouth. Xavier brought out a second chair, set it beside hers. Do they remember their father? He asked softly. No, she said. He died before Pearl could talk. She glanced down at her daughter. Perry remembers his voice, that's all, he nodded. You raised them alone. I did. She traced her fingers through Pearl's hair. Didn't feel like a burden most days, just felt like breathing, one foot in front of the other. You did good, Zadie. She turned slightly toward him. What about you? Anyone ever expect you home? No, he said. Never married, had a brother once. He didn't make it back from Appomattox. I'm sorry, he shook his head. You've known worse. She looked at him steadily. Hard doesn't cancel hard. The fire crackled between them, casting light over her profile, the curve of her neck, the soft line of her shoulder where fabric met skin. She didn't pull away when he brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Zadie. Her name left his mouth as if he'd been holding it for days. She looked up at him, eyes steady. I don't want to be afraid anymore. You won't be, he said. Not here. She leaned in, slow and sure, and when her mouth met his, it wasn't rushed. It was quiet, certain. Like the first time a storm gives way to sunlight, he rested his forehead to hers, unwilling to let go. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, she whispered. We'll build it, he said. one piece at a time. Inside, Perry had curled up on the floor beside the fire, the carved wolf tucked under his arm. Xavier stood, picked the boy up gently, and carried him to the bed. When he came back, Zadie had laid Pearl down on the small cot near the hearth. The girl shifted in sleep but didn't wake. Zadie turned to him, voice soft. "You're not what I expected, Xavier O'Malley. What did you expect? Someone who might walk away?" "I don't walk away from what matters." She reached for his hand, fingers threading with his. Then she whispered, "Then stay." And he did. The wheatgrass behind the cabin had begun to yellow, curling at the tips from the long stretch without rain. Zadie stood in the garden rows, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers pressing down around a young squash vine, coaxing the roots closer to the damp earth. She had never planted anything before. Life in Kansas had been spent chasing what already grew: milked cows, gathered eggs, boiled the same beans her mother had taught her to make. But this reaching into soil and waiting, that was new. Xavier's voice carried from the barn. "Try to keep your thumb behind the spine, Perry. You'll feel when the blade catches wrong." "I'm watching," the boy said. Zadie didn't rise. She let her hands stay in the dirt a little longer. Later, she found Xavier bent over a saddle, the leather cracked along the cantle. He was rubbing a thick salve into it, strokes slow and even. "You ever think about selling this place?" she asked. He didn't look up. "No, not even once. I tried once, after my uncle passed. Rode all the way to Cheyenne with the deed, but I turned back before I got there." "What changed your mind?" He paused, setting the cloth down. "The road felt wrong beneath me. Empty, like I was leaving more than land." She leaned against the post beside him. "I used to wonder what it'd be like to leave the prairie. Go east, find a job in one of those cities where everything's taller than a church steeple. Would you now? I don't think I could breathe in a place like that, not anymore." He straightened, wiping his palms on his trousers. "The land gets into you, quietly. You don't even notice till you try to leave." Zadie tilted her head. "Your ma, was she from here?" "No, Irish-born, met my father in Memphis, followed him west when the railroads were still promises. She died young, fever." She didn't press, he'd offered enough. Inside the cabin, Pearl was humming to herself while she stitched a square of fabric. She had made a doll from an old sock and named it Ruth. Zadie knelt beside her, threading the needle again. "Where'd you learn that song?" she asked. "Perry said Ma used to sing it when he was little." Zadie's hands paused. "He said that?" Pearl nodded. "I like it." Zadie kissed the top of her head. "I'll teach you the rest of it." That night the wind picked up, not with storm but with the dry restlessness that came before one. Zadie stood on the porch as the trees whispered. Xavier joined her, a tin cup in his hand. "Got a letter today," he said, offering it to her. She took it. The handwriting was tight and slanted. "From who?" "Louis Vaughn, works up near the fort. Says there's a teacher needed for the schoolhouse they're building come September. Perry's about the right age to start." She read the short note, then folded it carefully and handed it back. "You think we should go?" "I think it's not far from here. And I think you'd make a fine teacher yourself." "Me? You know more than you think, and you listen. That counts." She leaned against the railing. "Would we live there?" "Might not have to. It's a day's ride, less if we take the Ridge Trail. Could build something near the halfway point." "Build something?" He looked at her then, not hurried or hopeful, just steady. "If that's what you'd want." Zadie crossed her arms, watching lightning flicker far off in the clouds. "I used to think I wanted quiet," she said. "But I think what I really wanted was to be seen. Not just looked at and passed over, but seen. I see you. I know." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "I don't want a wedding dress or a preacher I've never met," she said. "I don't even want a ring, not if it costs you your horse." He pulled her close, arms wrapping around her waist. "I want whatever gives you peace." "I want this," she said against his chest. "Here, with you, with them." He kissed her once, slow and sure. Inside, the children slept, tucked beneath quilts Zadie had sewn from old shirts and flour sacks. The wind died down by morning. The ground was still dry, but the air smelled like something was coming, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't fear. The ridge trail climbed slow and steady, worn into the side of the hill by hooves and wagon wheels long before Xavier had ever taken it. Mid-morning, light spilled through the narrow breaks in the pine canopy, dappling the ground in shifting gold. Zadie walked beside the wagon, one hand on the rail where Pearl sat with Ruth tucked under her arm, the other holding a small sack of dried apples. Perry rode ahead on Xavier's mare, his back straight, reins loose in his grip. He didn't speak much during rides. He watched the trees like he was guarding something. Xavier led the way on whiskey, rifle slung across his back, gaze flicking between the trail and the tree line. Zadie glanced up at him. How much farther? Another hour if the trail holds. She swatted a branch out of her path. Does it usually? Depends on how much the deer have dug through it. We'll know soon. Pearl leaned over the side. Is there going to be a chimney? Zadie rested a hand on the girl's ankle. We'll see what your Mr. O'Malley has in mind. Xavier didn't turn. There'll be a chimney. Not much use to walls if smoke's got nowhere to go. Perry looked back over his shoulder. Will we sleep there? Not yet, Xavier said, but we'll raise the frame before the frost sets. Then we'll see. They reached the clearing by midday. The land opened gently, a flat stretch of grass bordered by a curve in the creek and a ring of cottonwoods leaning just enough to catch the wind. Zadie stood still, listening to the hush of it. No wagons, no shouts. Just water and birdsong and the slow creak of trees. Perry slid down from the horse and started circling the edge of the clearing. Where would the school be? North of here, Xavier said. Across the creek. You'll hear the bell when it gets built. Zadie walked the length of the clearing, boots brushing through tall grass. You sure this land doesn't belong to anyone? He nodded. Was surveyed last spring. No stake, no claim. Closest homesteads 5 miles west. I checked twice. She crouched and let her fingers trail through the soil. It was dark beneath the dry top layer. It'd hold a garden. He watched her a moment before answering. It'll hold whatever you want to grow. Pearl was stacking stones near the creek, arranging them in a crooked line. Zadie stood. We'll need a root cellar. Already planned it. Ground soft enough here. She looked over at him. How long were you thinking about this before you said anything? He shrugged. Since the day we brought him home. She stepped closer, brushing a pine needle from his collar. You didn't ask me if I wanted it. I didn't want to make you answer before you were ready. Her hand lingered at his shoulder. I'm ready. They stood like that for a long moment, the air warm between them. By late afternoon, the children were asleep in the wagon, curled among the bundles. Zadie sat on a flat stone near the water, sleeves rolled, feet bare, skirt pulled just high enough to dip her toes in. Xavier knelt beside a cedar stump, sketching a rough outline in the dirt with a stick 4 walls, a porch facing south, a lean-to for tools. She leaned over to look. You think about windows. He tapped 2 squares on the sketch. Morning light here, evening here. She traced the line of the porch. And a place to sit once the children are down. He looked at her. I can build that. She turned to him. Do you believe in second lives, Xavier? He wiped his hands on his trousers. Not sure I ever believed in first ones, not the way folks talk about, but I believe in seasons. Dry ones. Wet ones. Ones that take more than they give. She nodded. This feels like something new. He reached over, brushed a fleck of dirt from her wrist. Then let's build it right. Sunlight filtered through the cottonwoods, casting long shadows over the clearing. Zadie leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder where muscle met bone. He didn't move to break the moment. Behind them, the children stirred in their sleep, the wagon creaking gently as the wind passed through. Zadie lifted her head. We should go before dusk. I'll bring them, he said, already rising. She watched him walk to the wagon, watched how carefully he lifted Pearl and settled her against his chest, how Perry blinked up at him and didn't speak, just reached for his hand. As they rode back, Xavier glanced once over his shoulder at the clearing, the lines in the dirt already fading behind him. But what they'd drawn wasn't gone, it was waiting. The first frost came just after the harvest moon, a thin silver crust over the edges of the creek and the tops of the dry grass that hadn't yet been cleared. Zadie stood at the half-built cabin, Pearl bundled to her front in a wool shawl, and watched as Xavier and Perry hammered the final beam into place above the front door frame. The boy's swing wasn't strong, but it was steady, and Xavier let him drive the last nail with care. "You reckon it'll hold through winter?" Zadie asked, arms folded tight. Xavier stepped back, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "Won't be pretty yet, but it'll stand. We'll finish the chinking before the deep cold. Stove's already set." She nodded, rocking Pearl absently. "I never thought I'd live in a house I helped build." He looked at her, eyes warm beneath the brim of his hat. "You're not just living in it, you're setting its bones." She smiled, tired but full. "Perry said he wants his own hook by the door for his coat. Said it like it was the most important thing. I'll carve him one tomorrow." They rode back to the cabin before dusk. The days shortened quickly now, and the shadows stretched longer across the hills. Perry rode beside Xavier, asking about how to brace the roof against snow. Zadie listened from behind, chin against Pearl's curls, and let the sound of their voices settle into her. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Zadie ladled stew into bowls while Perry pulled off his boots and set them near the hearth. Pearl slept in a woven cradle Xavier had crafted from willow and birch, laid with a folded quilt Zadie had pieced from old shirts and scraps. "Do you ever miss the road?" she asked as she handed Xavier his supper. He shook his head. "I walked enough of it. I'd rather stay where I know whose footsteps come and go." Zadie set her own bowl down and sat beside him. "I used to think I'd always have to move, like standing still meant you'd be caught." He looked at her then, quiet and serious. "Ain't no one catching you now." "You're rooted." She nodded, reaching for his hand. "It feels like breathing again." That night, when the children were asleep, Zadie stepped out onto the porch and pulled her shawl tight. The stars had come out clean and close, the kind that wrapped the world in stillness. Xavier joined her, a blanket draped over one shoulder, and handed her a tin cup, steam curling into the cold. "I found a letter near the Ridge Trail," he said. "Dropped from a rider, maybe." It was addressed to the Fort Laramie School Committee. "What did it say?" "They're offering a teaching post to someone named Martha Bell. Seems she's not coming. The position's still open." Zadie held the cup close to her chest. "Do you think I could take it?" "I think you're already teaching every day. Might as well have the title to go with it." She laughed softly. "I never imagined this life, Xavier." He stepped closer. "I think we built it because we never imagined it. We just kept reaching for what felt right." She touched his cheek, rough from the cold. "I want to marry you," his breath caught. "You sure?" "There's no preacher nearby, and I don't want a paper signed by a stranger, but I want the name and I want the life." He took her hand. "Zadie Kessler O'Malley. It fits." They didn't need more than that. They told Perry and Pearl the next morning over cornbread and sweet tea. Perry nodded solemnly and asked if he could still call Xavier sir. Pearl wrapped her arms around both of them and whispered, "Can we all live together always?" Xavier answered first. "Always." They buried the last of the summer garden before the ground hardened, storing potatoes and squash in the root cellar behind the new house. The walls were sealed with clay and straw, the windows framed with glass salvaged from an old trading post Xavier had once helped dismantle. Zadie made curtains from old flour sacks, dyed with walnut husks, and stitched with her initials and the children's names. Xavier built a table from pine with his uncle's tools, wide enough for 4 plates and a candle in the center. There were still days when the wind howled too loud, when memories came uninvited. Zadie sometimes woke with her hand curled protectively over her chest, breath shallow from old panic. Xavier never asked. He'd simply reach for her, palm warm and solid, and she'd settle back into the quiet. One morning, the first snow fell, soft and slow. Pearl pressed her face to the glass, watching in silence. Perry opened the door and stood barefoot on the porch until Xavier scooped him up, laughing beneath his breath. Zadie watched them from the hearth, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. Xavier turned from the door, snow in his hair. I didn't think I'd end up anywhere, but now I can't imagine not being here. She walked to him, lifted his cold hand, and pressed it to her cheek. I love you, she said. He kissed her temple, quiet and sure. I love you too, and that was the truth of it, not loud or hurried, just steady. Like the land beneath them, like the house they'd built, like the life they were still shaping together. Years passed, but the rhythm held. Zadie taught at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, riding with Perry in the mornings while Pearl stayed with Xavier and helped tend the garden. The children grew lean and strong, their laughter echoing through the trees. Perry carved a new hook each year, lining them down the wall. Pearl learned to read by the fire, curled in her father's lap. The winters came and went. The house stood firm. One spring morning, Zadie knelt in the garden, hands buried in soft earth, and felt a flutter beneath her ribs. She smiled, pressed her palm to her belly, and whispered, "We'll make room." That night she told Xavier by the light of the fire. His face changed slowly, wonder blooming through the quiet. He pulled her close and said only, "Good, that's good." And it always would be.